have Ambassador Sajdik here from Austria, permanent representative of Austria to the United Nations. And I have asked Franz Kolb from the Governor's Office of Economic Development to introduce the ambassador. I'm Rusty Butler. I'm the Associate Vice President for International Affairs and Diplomacy. And I don't see anybody from Ukraine here. So I'm also the Honorary Consul General for the Russian Federation. That's why my Ukraine remark. Franz Kolb happens to also be the Honorary Consul of Austria. And so he and the ambassador have been speaking Austrian German, but it all sounds the same to me. So please, Franz, would you introduce, and while you're coming up, I just might point to our Senior Academic Vice President, Jeffrey Olson. Would you raise your hand? He is our, for want of a better word, although the title doesn't carry it, provost here at the university. He is the operational person for the university, and we're delighted to have him. He came to us from New York, from St. John's, and knows many of these ambassadors at the United Nations because he helped host them from time to time as well. So with that, Franz, would you introduce the ambassador, and we'll turn the time over to him.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. As it has been pointed out, I work in the Governor's Office of Economic Development and the Director for Trade and Diplomacy, as well as Protocol. And so in my job, I have the opportunity to host many dignitaries, ambassadors, consuls general, honorary consuls. And I have had a career for about 30 years, and I have to tell you, I've met in my career over 400 ambassadors, consuls general, and honorary consuls. But I have never met anybody with the character and with the wherewithal of the current ambassador, extraordinary and plenipotentiary permanent representative of Austria to the United Nations, His Excellency Martin Sajdik. A man that I wish you all could speak Austrian German. He has a wonderful, wonderful dialect, speaks from the heart, is a great individual. We've had the pleasure yesterday to visit the Lieutenant Governor as well as the Utah State Senate. The Senate issued a citation welcoming His Excellency. In my career, ladies and gentlemen, this is the first Austrian ambassador to the United Nations that is visiting Utah. So we are really delighted, and I'm so grateful for Utah Valley University for the invitation of His Excellency and his kind wife, Tamara. So a little bit of a background. A very important, His Excellency is a very important individual in the United Nations. He's the 17th President of the Economic and Social Council of the United Nations. He has had previous appointments as the Austrian ambassador to the People's Republic of China, Mongolia, and the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. From 2003 to 2007, he was the Director General for Economic Affairs and European Integration. And between postings at the Austrian Embassy in Moscow and with the Executive Secretariat of the Conference on Security and Cooperation in Europe, in Vienna, he held executive positions at a major Austrian construction company and an Austrian bank in Moscow. Early in his career, he served as the permanent representative of Austria to the United Nations office at Geneva. Ambassador Sajdik studied law, international law, and international relations in Vienna, Moscow, and Bologna. He received his doctorate degree at the University of Vienna in 1971, and he's the author of several books on the enlargement process of the European Union. published in Austria, Germany, the United States, and most recently in China. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me give a warm Utah welcome to His Excellency Martin Sajdik, Ambassador of Austria to the United Nations.
Thank you very much for this warm introduction, Dr. Butler, Franz Kolb. It's always wonderful to have a countryman of this stature and of this, really good heart that Franz Kolb has to see him and to see him working here in this wonderful state of Utah. I have come here to speak about not only Austria and not what the United Nations is doing in the Security Council. I have come here to speak about sustainable development because I'm, at the moment, as it was already said, president of the Economic and Social Council of the United Nations, which is one of the statutory bodies of the Charter, like the General Assembly, like the Security Council, the Secretariat, the International Court of Justice, also ECOSOC. And ECOSOC will have an important role to play in the implementation of the post-2015 development agenda. And it is, I do myself, so to say, I easen up my job in talking to you and lecturing to you. I would like to show you a wonderful film before that was not taken by me, but it was taken by a 15-year-old student, pupil in Switzerland about the new UN agenda on first the Millennium Development Goals and on the post-2015 development agenda on the Sustainable Development Goals. And I do believe that this video, this film, will give you a much better understanding than I can have, than I can give you in this 14 minutes of a lecture. And then after this film, I will go on and with my explanation, but I do think that this is a wonderful basis. We played it last week also at the ECOSOC Youth Forum in front of more than 400 delegates from all over the world. And they loved it and liked it, and I'm sure you will too. So first the film and then me, okay? Thank you.
The Sustainable Development Goals are a United Nations initiative to change the world. They will guide development programs in all countries for the next 15 years. If these Sustainable Development Goals are reached, we will live in a much better world by the time we turn 30. It's our generation's turn to shape the world. We need to know what these goals are, where they come from, and how we can help achieve them.
The Sustainable Development Goals give the world the opportunity to come together and plan our future together. They give us a chance to think in an integrated fashion about the importance not only of social issues, but economic and environmental issues.
And yet it seems very few of us know what these goals are.
No.
It's like there's three sides. So there's like environment, economic, and yeah.
No. No. No.
Okay, Houston, we've had a problem here. This is Houston. Say again, please. Houston, we've had a problem.
Houston, we do indeed have a problem. Right now, 1 in 7 people on Earth live in extreme poverty. 1 in 9 are undernourished. 58 million girls and boys are out of primary school. 73 million young people are unable to find a job. Every day, we're one step closer to heating up the planet beyond repair. With more than 9 billion people on our planet in 2050, it's likely there will be wars over water and other scarce resources. A few decades ago, our parents wanted the world to come together as one. Inspired by their stars, they would buy the We Are the World record and donate money for individual causes like hunger. It took 15 years and the Chernobyl nuclear disaster, the Gulf War, the Rwanda genocide, and the war in Kosovo for our parents to realize that to change the world we need a shared vision, a framework for action, and clearly defined goals and targets. So, in 2000, the United Nations launched a set of 8 clearly defined goals. Each of these Millennium Development Goals came with ambitious targets to reach before 2015. Most of us were born around the same time as world leaders adopted these goals. So what happened while we grew up? The good news is that 4 of the goals have been reached. In 2010, 700 million fewer people lived in extreme poverty than in 1990. 90% of all girls and boys were enrolled in primary school education. The bad news is that 1.2 billion people are still trapped in poverty. The financial crisis has left millions unemployed. Our planet is gradually getting warmer. The clock is ticking. Fortunately, the stars of our generation know it's time to take action. And one of them has found the solution. A donut. Or, to be more precise, the donut model. The donut model shows we cannot continue to destroy our planet. If just one of these areas is depleted, be it the ozone layer or water, we're in deep trouble. This donut model is based on the concept of sustainable development. Sustainable development ties together concern for the environment with the social and economic challenges faced by humanity. When our world leaders gathered at the Rio +20 conference in 2012, they decided it was time to embrace the donut model and come up with a new set of sustainable development goals. The United Nations established an open working group in January 2013 to prepare a draft set of goals. They also asked a group of 26 political and business leaders to share their ideas. Knowing that governments cannot realize sustainable development alone, the United Nations also consulted workers, farmers, teachers, and many others. More than 5 million young women and men responded to a survey in which the United Nations asked them what would make the greatest difference in their lives. Guess what most people mentioned? A good education. Earlier this year, the Open Working Group brought all of these ideas together and proposed 17 sustainable goals. That's a lot of goals to keep track of. But the first 7 goals are basically a tweaked version of the old development goals that will expire in 2015.
They'll build on the Millennium Development Goals, which were 8 goals that particularly focused on social issues and social challenges. Now with the Sustainable Development Goals, we look at those issues, but also the important economic and environmental goals.
The next 5 goals describe the inner circle of the donut, the social issues we must tackle if we are to lift millions of women and men out of poverty. The next 3 goals concern the outer circle of the donut, the environment, climate change, oceans, and land degradation. The last 2 goals tell us that the Sustainable Development Goals can only be achieved and maintained if national and global partners work towards peaceful and inclusive societies. Some of these goals are easy to understand. Others a little hazy and not as sharp as they could be. And they're accompanied by no less than 169 targets. Our world leaders clearly have a lot of homework to do in the next year or so. How likely is it that the Sustainable Development Goals will be adopted in September 2015?
I'm convinced that there will be a set of Sustainable Development Goals that are adopted in September of 2015. What they're exactly going to look like is still up for discussion, and that's why it's so important for people like you and your colleagues and fellow students to engage in the process today.
We need to get involved in these goals. These goals are the best shot we've got at ensuring that the world we will live in when we become adults will be safer, greener, and more equal. If we don't help keep them alive, who else will? So take this online survey today and let them know which future you want. But don't just stop there. Consider for a moment how you can use your knowledge, energy, education, and passions to make the world a better place by the time you turn 30-something. While you might fear that one voice won't make a difference, your voice counts. Tell your friends about the donut and about the Sustainable Development Goals. Tell your family, classmates, anyone and everyone about these goals and how we must come together to achieve them. Tell your parents not to vote for politicians who don't take sustainable development seriously. And when we get to vote in a few years' time, let's vote for those who care about our planet and our future. The Sustainable Development Goals are our goals. They're not just our parents' goals, or our governments, or the United Nations. The Sustainable Development Goals are our generation's chance to shape the world we want.
Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed this film because from my point of view, it really depicts where we stand in this unique process of bringing the whole world into a agenda of sustainable development. And if you imagine that this film was taken by, I repeat myself, 15-year-old girl in Geneva, so this is really, really wonderful. Let me come back and let me, so to say, try to explain some background to this. We are now negotiating, and it was said in the film, that the Sustainable Development Agenda, the post-2015 agenda, will have to be adopted in September of this year. And by the heads of states and governments in the United Nations in New York at the high-level week of the General Assembly. So the American president will be there, the Austrian president will be there, I guess the Kyrgyz president will be there. I don't know about Mali, that is not so sure, but let's hope that you will have a government in place and a system in place that also Mali then will have an opportunity to participate, and I'm sure from many other states, because they will adopt something which is history. And which will make history from the 1st of January 2016 on, when this agenda will have to be implemented. But what would make history has a history. And in this film, it has come out pretty well. The background of the Sustainable Development Goals for the future are the Millennium Development Goals that were adopted in the year 2000. And the difference between the Millennium Development Goals and the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDG, the MDGs and the SDGs, is not only in the number. You have 8 and you have 17. But these 8 were only oriented towards developing countries. What we do now is a global agenda. It is an agenda that will be in place for all countries of this world. And it means that also our developed countries, the developed world, will have to adapt, will have to implement this agenda, will have to implement all these 17 goals. The Millennium Development Goals were goals that were actually, I would say, driven by science. One of the main minds behind the Millennium Development Goals is the famous, Nobel Prize winner Jeffrey Sachs. Jeffrey Sachs had the idea that in the millennium, in the new millennium, we have to do something really for development. And he came with this idea to have the development goals and that have the Millennium Development Goals, and they have to be formulated in a simple way, in an understandable way, so that people really understand. And they succeeded. They are simple, they are clear, and they are concentrated on some very few issues. Poverty eradication, poverty reduction, then having more more children attending school, reducing child mortality, reducing also the problem of HIV, of tuberculosis and malaria. These were the orientation of the 8 goals. And we have done pretty well. But we have not been able to eradicate poverty totally, as it was said clearly in the film. There are still 1.8 billion people who live below $1.25 per day. Can you imagine? Below $1.25 per day, 1.8 billion people in this world. And this is not only a problem of exchange rates. This is a real problem. You have to imagine how can one live for less than $1.5 a day. So the eradication of poverty for the whole world is an issue that we really have to work on. And this is in continuation of the Millennium Development Goals. We now want to eradicate poverty totally. Under the Millennium Development Goals, we wanted to halve poverty. And we have succeeded in halving poverty already by the year 2010. Mostly thanks to the unbelievable development of China in the past 10, 15 years. But we have not only in China poverty was reduced, in other countries in Asia poverty was reduced, and also in Latin America, and also in some African countries. There has been poverty reduction, not only in China and also India, but in all other continents too, with differentiated, one has to say, success, but it was there. But we cannot be content with saying we just want to halve it. Our goal must be to eradicate it. And this is the goal number 1 then of the Sustainable Development Goals, to eradicate poverty. But I told you that the Millennium Development Goals were, so to say, science-driven, also to increase development aid. Official development aid was going down in the late 90s, and there was also a drive to get more development aid again and to get more understanding that the official development aid is necessary. And it is a miracle, but with the MDGs and with the whole focus on the MDGs, also official development aid got up, and it worked. If you also look at the cases of HIV that have gone down, also some of the successes that one has had in fighting tuberculosis and also malaria. It works if humanity, so to say, pulls up its sleeves and concentrates on certain issues. But the problems of the Millennium Development Goals, if one can speak of problems, is that they are only focused on certain areas, and that they were not driven by the peoples from all around the globe, but only, so to say, science-induced. And out of this we have learned, and we have learned to make it a new process that is a global process and that involves really all. And these were the negotiations on the Sustainable Development Goals in the Open Working Group. That was, and I understand that the Hungarian ambassador, Csaba Körösi, who was one of the co-chairs of this Open Working Group to work on the Sustainable Development Goals, he had been here in Utah and had been speaking to you. And he had delivered a simple miracle. Together with his wonderful colleague from Kenya, Macharia Kamau, they have been able to develop these Sustainable Development Goals with all the member countries of the United Nations. Can you imagine, simply imagine, that 193 countries agree on a set of 17 goals and 169 sub-targets? Can you imagine that this is possible? Yes, it is possible. And we did it in June of last year. It is in itself a miracle. And we agreed on goals that will be in place for, I repeat myself, for all of us, for the developed countries and for the developing countries. And also this is a completely new process. We in the developed countries will have to learn that we will have to implement a UN agenda. We will have to put in place the mechanisms not only on, so to say, on the federal level, but also on the local level. On the local level, okay, you have your 50 states, so you should have mechanisms to put in place this agenda in these 50 states. Austria is much smaller, has 9 federal states. We also will have to have, some mechanisms in place for our 8.5 million people to have this agenda enacted, implemented in Austria, inasmuch as in the developing countries. And you will have to have mechanisms to control it, mechanisms that show how does the implementation work, who is going to monitor it, who is going to review it. This is not yet clear. We have not been speaking about these issues at the moment. Who is going to monitor it? Who is going to monitor, who is going to control the implementation? We are in the process of these negotiations. We still have time until the end of September of this year to put that all in place. We only have the goals yet. We don't have the mechanisms of implementation, and we don't have the mechanisms of control. We still have to work out, and there are at the moment, again, working groups in the UN in New York working exactly on this. And one of the co-chairs of this working group is again this fabulous ambassador from Kenya, Macharia Kamau, who will be then really, so to say, the patron of the whole process of the SDGs and of sustainable development for the next 15 years. Unbelievable gentleman, and I'm very honored and privileged to be on very, so to say, good, not only working but also personal terms. He's a wonderful and extremely outstanding man. And I understand that you also have plans to invite him here, and you should come and listen to him. He's a wonderful speaker too. So we are in the process. We still have time. We will have a special forum was put into place to talk annually about the implementation of this process. And this forum is the high-level political forum, which is under the auspices of ECOSOC. This brings in now me as a person. The ECOSOC is, so to say, the body of the United Nations to organize the implementation on a global level, to follow up, to monitor on this implementation of the global level, and to work through all these subsidiary bodies to have this agenda implemented. It all sounds very bureaucratic, but all these mechanisms are in place, and we simply has to use it. One simply has to use these mechanisms and has to concentrate to do it. And the position of an ECOSOC president for the next 15 years will be absolutely fascinating when implementing this agenda, when looking after how these 17 goals will be implemented. And this is something that will, in the future, also be interesting, I hope, for your university here. How does one work with these people? How does ECOSOC, how does the UN system, so to say, cope with it? Let me speak again about the implementation at the national level. You will have to have government structures that work on the implementation, but you will also have to have structures to monitor the implementation. To monitor implementation, first, obviously, parliaments. You have supreme audit institutions in all your countries, in all your states here. So they will be in charge to do that, to monitor it, to follow up. Then it comes to the regional and to the global level, and there will be this follow-up and monitoring in New York in the high-level political forum, as I said, under the auspices of ECOSOC. But if we speak about implementation, we have to speak about who has the means for implementation. Where's the money? You know, we cannot only adopt a wonderful agenda, but also the money has to come from somewhere. And the whole idea is to have also a renewed effort to step up development assistance. Now, for development in developing countries, I don't know whether you're familiar with it, but the first and main resource for development in each country are the own budgetary resources of a country. So the primary goal will be to help each country, each developing country, to, so to say, have enough own budgetary resources to implement the development goals. How can you help them? To learn, to talk to them, to have capacity building on having increasing the tax base, to fight corruption, having the countries better connected in the world economy. So there are many possibilities without direct development aid to enhance the capability of the countries to have enough money themselves to put it in. So the first means are their own means of each country. Second means, and the second, so to say, source for development are, and this might be quite interesting for you to hear, are remittances. Remittances from the workers abroad, from immigrants abroad, who send back their money. For many countries, this is very, very known. My wife comes from Kyrgyzstan. Remittances of Kyrgyz workers outside of Kyrgyzstan, mostly in Russia, or also outside of Russia, outside of the former Soviet bloc, are extremely important for the development of the country. And they are primary resources. And in Kyrgyzstan now, with the Russian economy in a pretty bad shape, there are repercussions, direct repercussions, on the economic situation in Kyrgyzstan because the remittances go down, or people lose jobs and have to go back. And this decreases, so to say, the number, the money that is there in place for development, for, you know, people from their relatives. You get money sent back, you put it into your house, renew your, renovate your house, build some house, or invest in a small tractor or whatever in agriculture. This is the system of remittances. Number two for development. And only number three is official development aid. In 2013, the figure of official development aid worldwide by OECD countries stood at, let me just get the figures, I hope I'm not wrong, at $134 billion. $134 billion. The main donor was, and I'm proud to say that, the European Union. The main donor providing $76 billion in 2013. The European Union, its member states, and the European Commission. The United States provided something more than $30 billion in 2013. And if you see the difference between the European Union and now me as a proud European, I have to say that here in the US, you have a considerable higher number coming from Europe. Europe is a global payer. Europe is not a global player, but we are the global payers, and everybody likes us as the global payers. Not so many like us as global players. You can think of this also in many of the, so to say, political contexts that we have at the moment, but as global payers, we are very much welcome. And we will continue to do so. And some of the European countries, most of the European countries, have already been successful in reaching the threshold of the 0.7 GNI that should be given to development aid. We have 2 ODA. In the European Union, we have about 0.47. In the US, it is just around 0.29 or 0.3. And so there is, for both, still quite some way to go. Europe doesn't have to double the aid anymore, but it still has to put up much more. And there was also a long way for the United States, because the goal of 0.7 has been enshrined already for more than 20 years as the goal for means of implementation. But we should not forget that there are new players in the field, new global payers. And these global payers come from Arab countries. Saudi Arabia, the Emirates have an ODA of yearly of about more than $5 billion. And that is quite a considerable amount of money for countries of this size. Let's not forget about China. If the figures are correct, it's more than 3 billion that China put up last year for official development aid. India, a little bit more than 1.2 billion. So money is coming and is increasing also from other sources, not only from the Western countries and Japan, but also from new, so to say, new players, new payers. And this will be certainly more and more in the years to come, in the time of the post-2015 agenda. And but still there is a long way to go if we want to reach the 0.7 threshold for all those donors. So this is talking about the means of implementation. So you will ask yourself, well, and will the countries have the capacity to implement it? Will there be the structures for implementation? And this is certainly an open question. And one of the one of the areas that we have to talk about in this respect is especially how are we able to speak about the right structures in place? Do we have the right structures? Do we have the rule of law in most of the countries that is necessary to have enough capacity to implement? And one of the goals that you could see is goal 16. That speaks about a good governance, that speaks about access to justice, and that speaks about the rule of law. And this goal has a couple of sub-targets to implement, and one of the main areas that is put here into question and so to say, the light is put on this is the fight against corruption. Last year we had a seminar at the Youth Forum in New York. I already spoke about the Youth Forum before, and there was a delegate from Senegal who said, the biggest discrimination of young people is corruption. And then he stopped and said, you know why? Because young people don't have the money to bribe. And that's really true. If you don't have the money to bribe, you are discriminated. So one of the main areas that we have to fight for in all countries, corruption is there in all countries, in developed countries and in developing countries. And we have to fight corruption. And this is one of the main goals that we will have when we speak about capacity building, especially under Goal 16 and the targets under Goal 16. I do have here copies of the development of the goals, of the Sustainable Development Goals, and I would be very pleased if you take your time, take it to, it was kindly reproduced here, and by our dear friend Ms. Barnett, and thank you very much for this, and have a special look at Goal 16. And you will see that Goal 16 and the targets under Goal 16, they concern you directly. When you go back from university, you might be the ones to then, in your countries or in your state, to implement the agenda. And then don't forget about that there are these targets under Goal 16 that demand that you really put in place the right structures, the right capacities in each country. And remember what the girls said in the film. Talk to your parents, not to vote for politicians who don't implement the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, I'm here not to, so to say, call for revolts in your homes, and this is not the way that I should normally end as an ambassador my presentation, but I do believe that this is a very nice message, that at least if you don't, you don't have to tell that to your parents, but at least do it yourself. When you are old enough to make your own political decisions, and I think one has to keep that in mind, keep in mind how we really shape our future and how we can contribute to shaping this future. So thank you very much for your attention. I hope that I am more or less on time, and I'm really willing and look forward to your questions. Please.